of the Packet Educational Video Series. Today we're going to start looking at pages 3-3 to 3-5. And this section is found in the rudiments portion of the book, and the title of these pages is the 5 Essential Strokes. Now, these strokes are not the strokes that we've talked about in a previous video, which are the 4 fundamental strokes: legato, staccato, taps, and upstroke. These 5 strokes are more of what I call the essential strokes to advancing your drumming or to working on advanced rudiments. So this would be what we learn after we've worked on the first 4 fundamental strokes. So this is an evolution to create a higher quality and a wider ranging rudimental vocabulary. The first of the 5 strokes that I want to look at will be today's video, and that is the fingers. And so the fingers for me is something that usually we don't spend a lot of time on in the first few years or even first year of drumming, because we're working on such large muscle groups and grip and fulcrum position and hand position and floppy. There's so much to work on and develop that the intricate side of the playing we don't usually spend as much time on. So for me, once we've gotten past that part of their education and they're ready to take the next step, then fingers is the first thing that we start looking at. Now in this video I am going to play traditional grip, but everything I do with my right hand, if you're a match grip player, you would do on your left hand. So I'm going to show a match grip version of everything and then a traditional grip side to everything. So fingers. For me, fingers are extremely important, and you cannot move forward in your vocabulary without having fingers that can work for you and produce that extra amount of speed and control you need, especially at the lowest end of our heights. Because a lot of rudiments have so much going on at the low end, and a lot of that's coming from our fingers more than it is just our wrists or our elbows or our shoulder. And so for me, there's kind of 4 hinges that you can look at when you're talking about playing a stroke on the pad. First we have the shoulder hinge, which is obviously for my extreme drumming. A lot of our visual drumming comes from the shoulder. Then we have our elbow for when we're adding a lot of power into the playing, but trying to also play at a height that allows us to continue playing versus just the full shoulder visual. The wrist, which is the most common and most used hinge of our playing. And then the last hinge of our playing comes from our fingers. So our muscle groups get larger as we go back toward the shoulder, or smaller as we get toward the stick. And all of these hinges serve a great purpose, but today we're going to focus more on what the fingers do. So for me, before we can really use our fingers, we have to learn how to feel our fingers, and we have to learn to start moving our fingers independently and making them work on command. And it's surprising when you start doing this how many students don't know how to make their fingers work because they're so used to just making their whole hand work. So the first thing we can do is actually just take the stick, hold it backwards so the heavy end is pointing back, and I'm just going to take the stick and I'm just going to practice flicking the stick with each finger, just so I can practice activating the finger without using the wrist. And so I'm going to go each finger at a time, and I'm just going to practice getting each finger to move the stick. So first finger, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. And so I'm just going to spend time just working each one of those fingers just to activate. And you can speed it up, but in this case, speed doesn't really matter because we're just working on activating. So you can even go slow and work each finger by itself. It doesn't have to be very fast right now. Okay, and then once we've got that going, the next step then is to take the same way we're holding the stick, but bring it to here. So now gravity is going to hold my stick straight down, and then what that's going to allow me to do is watch my wrist to see if I'm moving my wrist or actually using my fingers. So I'm going to take again and go one finger at a time, and I'm going to hit my forearm and making sure that I'm isolating each finger and not using my wrist. Same thing, middle finger, ring finger, and pinky. So again, I'm just trying to make sure I'm activating each finger, and that the only reason the stick is moving is because that finger is making it happen. Okay? Then you can start combining. Instead of just my first finger, I can combine first finger, middle finger. Or I can do middle finger, ring finger. I can do the first 3 fingers. I can do just the pinky and the fulcrum. I can do all 4 fingers. It doesn't matter. But again, the reason we're hanging straight up and down is so we can watch to make sure that we're not using that wrist. And then again, working at different speeds, at different heights, adding 1 finger, taking away a finger, but I'm just going to practice getting my fingers activated and moving by using my forearm. Okay, next from there, I'm going to take and I'm going to put my hand more in a playing position, and then I'm going to start again watching my wrist to make sure it's not working, it's not doing anything, and I'm going to practice now moving against gravity. So I have to add a little more strength into the stick with each finger to keep it hitting my forearm, because if not, it's going to want to collapse because of gravity. And again, making sure that I'm only isolating the fingers, keeping my wrist as still as I can. The wrist is going to wiggle, but I'm not using it. And again, activating and using those fingers. The great thing about this is I can sit in front of the TV, I can be reading a book, there's all kinds of times where I can just be sitting and practicing my fingers without being in front of the practice pad, without a metronome. I can just be reading, watching TV, it doesn't matter. But I can be working on this in the car, I can be working on this on the bus. At any point, I can just be practicing my fingers, and it's relatively quiet, and I don't need any other implements but a stick. And then from there, we can flip over and hold the tip going back, which is a little lighter. And the last thing is, I then flip it out here and then transfer those fingers onto the pad. So the first step to using the fingers is to activate them, to actually feel what it feels like to make the fingers work versus the wrist. Okay? And of course that takes time, but the more you work it out on your forearm, when you get to the pad, the more you can start feeling those fingers moving instead of your wrist moving. On the left hand, it's a little different. The way I would activate the fingers on the left hand is what I just call drop the stick. And in this case, when I let go of the stick, my thumb has to keep going to keep the stick moving. So this is drop the stick and just using the thumb on my fulcrum of my traditional grip. And it can be at different heights, low, higher, it doesn't matter. And then I can add the first finger, which is the other part of my fulcrum, to the same thing. And then from there, we can start getting creative where we play different patterns between my thumb and my finger. Even if I'm going to play traditional grip, I still go through the whole process on my left hand because I don't play everything traditional grip. So when it's time for me to get to the drum set and I want to do match grip or concert snare, or if I'm moving over to quads or timpani, it doesn't matter what instrument. When I'm using match grip, I want the same finger strength and control on this left hand as I do my right hand. Okay. Step 2 is we're going to start putting them into rhythm with tempo. The first exercise, it does say to play at all 3 inches, but playing the 3-inch tap takes more control than the 6-inch. So if I'm playing 6 inches with my fingers, that's actually more comfortable than playing 3 inches. Same thing with my left hand. My thumb or my first finger at 6 inches is more comfortable than 3 inches. So it's okay if this starts at a higher height just to work yourself into it. But for sure, you've got to get down to the 3-inch, because that's where the control is going to come in with your advanced rudiments. And I would even push to 2 inches and 1 inch just to be ridiculous on how low I go, because the lower I can make it feel good, then when I bring it back up to 3, or I have singles at 6, it's going to feel really, really comfortable. And that's the goal. All right, the first exercise, we have an add-on going on. So we're going to start with the skeleton or the check pattern of one-tite. And after each one-tite, I can end up, I can end down. It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to get the fingers moving and activated. And you can hear I'm squeezing at the end of each one, because I'm trying to move the fingers and make them work hard. So I'm not worried necessarily about having perfect heights and perfect sound right now. I'm just working, are the fingers moving and can I get them stronger and faster? Okay, and then after the one-tite or the 1-en check pattern, I add on a full count of 16th notes to make 1-tite to 2-tite, 3-tite to 4-tite, and then I go back. And on the 1-tite rhythm, on the 8th notes, you can do that as finger or wrist. A lot of times I'll wrist those because they're slower than when I need fingers. So if I don't need to use my fingers, I'm not going to. And then I go back to my check pattern, and then I add 2 counts of 16th notes. And I just keep working that all the way through the add-on. And then the longer I add on 16th notes, the more work I'm putting into my fingers. Again, on the 8th notes, it's okay to use your wrists, because that even gives you a chance to relax your fingers before you go to the next pattern. And then left hand. And then I can repeat it and use my first finger, and then put it together and use both. Thumb, check, first finger, check, together, etc. And so the idea is to keep adding on 16th notes until you get to where you can do at least a full measure of 16th notes. And by then, I think you're ready to go. Because rarely do we need more than one full measure of 16th notes at a low end on one hand. Plus, I think once you get comfortable enough to do 4 counts in a row, then going to 5 and 6 is easier than I think first starting trying to get 1, 2, 3, and 4. But once you have it figured out, just keep adding on. It's important that you use a metronome as well when working on these types of exercises, because if not, when it gets harder, you're going to change your tempo to make it easier for you. So by keeping the metronome going, even if it's a little too fast and it's not as good as you want it, at least you're keeping yourself honest and pushing your tempo. And that's the best way to build up your fingers. And anything in these pages that has a single hand stroke, I can put it together and play them as double stops. And that applies to all the exercises. So double stops, etc. The other thing I can do is I can add the single into it to make it a faster rhythm by adding an offsetting single stroke roll idea. So for example, or double stop, or you can alternate the 8th notes. And so what I'm doing now is I'm understanding that if I can do this and this, then I can do that. So it applies to splitting the hands as well. Because obviously splitting the hands doesn't mean I'm playing any faster. It just means I'm alternating what I've already worked on. Changing your height is also a good idea. So if I'm more comfortable here, that's fine. But again, ultimately, you want to push yourself down to get to that 1, 2, 3 inch range. Okay, so that's the first stroke of our 5 essential strokes, the fingers. And I tell my students that you can never work on your fingers enough. Even when you start feeling comfortable with them, you need to keep pushing the speed and keep pushing the speed and keep, because having fast fingers is going to make a lot of the things you play easier and sound way better, especially when you go to timpani, or you go to playing triangle, or you go to playing on your mallet instruments or suspended cymbal. There's so many instruments that when I start building up the speed in my fingers, I can apply that skill to make things sound better. Okay, so that's it for video 1. For video 2, we're going to explore the next of the 5 essential strokes. So look for that. But for now, jump on your pad, grab your sticks, and start practicing on your fingers. Good luck.